Jake Harris had been a truck driver for over 20 years. He had seen it all: the long stretches of empty highways, the occasional roadside brawls, and the endless cups of bitter truck stop coffee. But nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to experience one fateful night. It was late October, and the air was crisp and cold. Jake was hauling a load of electronics from Chicago to Denver. The route was familiar, but the weather forecast warned of an unusual fog rolling in. Jake wasn't easily spooked by weather reports, so he shrugged it off and hit the road. As night fell, the fog descended, thick and impenetrable. The headlights of Jake's truck barely pierced the murky gloom. He leaned forward, squinting at the road, trying to make out the lines on the asphalt. The radio crackled, losing signal every now and then, leaving him in eerie silence. A chill ran down Jake's spine, but he kept driving. He had a deadline to meet. After an hour of navigating the dense fog, he saw a figure standing by the side of the road. It was a woman, her long dark hair hanging over her face, wearing a dress that looked out of place in the cold weather. She held out her thumb, signaling for a ride. Jake hesitated. He had always been cautious about picking up hitchhikers, but something about this woman seemed different. He pulled over and rolled down the window. "Do you need help?" he called out. The woman nodded, her face still obscured by her hair. Jake opened the passenger door, and she climbed in without a word. The air inside the cab instantly felt colder. "Where are you headed?" Jake asked, trying to make conversation. "Just up ahead," she replied in a soft, almost whispery voice. Jake nodded and put the truck in gear. They drove in silence for a while, the fog wrapping around them like a shroud. Jake glanced at the woman out of the corner of his eye. She sat unnaturally still, staring straight ahead. "Are you okay?" Jake asked. The woman turned her head slowly, revealing pale, lifeless eyes. "I need to go home," she said. Jake's heart skipped a beat. There was something deeply unsettling about her gaze. He tried to focus on the road, but the tension in the cab was palpable. After a few more minutes, the woman pointed to a narrow, unmarked road leading into the woods. "Turn here," she said. Jake hesitated. The road looked barely passable, but he complied, maneuvering the truck carefully. They drove deeper into the forest, the trees closing in around them. The fog seemed even thicker here, and the headlights barely illuminated the path. Suddenly, the truck's engine sputtered and died. Jake cursed under his breath and tried to restart it, but it was no use. The truck was dead in the water. "I'll check the engine," Jake said, grabbing his flashlight. He stepped out into the cold night, the fog swirling around him. He opened the hood and inspected the engine, but nothing seemed out of place. "Can you help me?" the woman's voice echoed from the cab. Jake turned, but she was no longer inside. Panic set in as he looked around, shining his flashlight into the darkness. The beam caught a glimpse of movement deeper in the woods. He followed it, his heart pounding. He found the woman standing in a small clearing, staring at an old, decrepit house. The windows were boarded up, and the paint was peeling off in large patches. It looked abandoned, yet there was an air of malevolence about it. "This is my home," the woman said, her voice echoing strangely. Jake took a step back. "I can't leave my truck here," he said. "I need to get it running again." The woman turned to face him, her eyes now glowing with an unnatural light. "You won't need it," she whispered. Before Jake could react, she let out a blood-curdling scream. The fog thickened around them, and Jake felt an icy hand grip his heart. He stumbled back, trying to escape, but the fog seemed to pull him deeper into the forest. He heard whispers all around him, disembodied voices calling his name. He ran blindly through the woods, his flashlight flickering and dying. The darkness closed in, and he could feel something chasing him, something unseen and terrifying. Jake tripped over a root and fell to the ground, gasping for breath. He looked up and saw the woman standing over him, her face twisted into a grotesque smile. "Welcome home," she said. Jake screamed and blacked out. When he woke up, he was back in his truck, the engine running smoothly. The fog was gone, and the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. He sat up, shaking, and looked around. There was no sign of the woman or the house. He started the truck and drove back to the main road, not daring to look back. He reached the nearest truck stop and parked, his hands still trembling. He called his dispatcher and told them he couldn't make the delivery. He needed to get home. Jake quit his job the next day. He never drove a truck again, haunted by the memory of that night. He spent the rest of his life trying to forget the horror he had encountered, but the image of the woman's glowing eyes and the eerie house in the woods never left him. Years later, Jake heard rumors from other truck drivers about the haunted road and the ghostly hitchhiker who led men to their doom. He realized that he wasn't the first to encounter her, and he wouldn't be the last. The legend of the horror house and its ghostly resident lived on, a chilling reminder of the night Jake Harris came face to face with the unknown.